Good evening. I don't know. Well, if you're familiar with a roller coaster, like if you've ever ridden a roller coaster, which I think is a lot of us, I want you to imagine one. But if you're more familiar with the abomination that can be found at Universal Studios known as Rip Ride Rocket, that is what I want you to picture, because that is what I am picturing. So I want you to imagine a roller coaster. You're sitting there, slightly leaned back. You're strapped in all sorts of ways that feel both secure and terrifyingly unsecure. You start to hear the click, click, click as the chain rattles. You start to move forward, and then you're leaning back a little bit more. You move forward, you're leaning back a little bit more. You move forward, and all of a sudden, you're pretty much laying down while in a seated position, looking straight up at the sky. And it continues this click, lurch, click, lurch, click, lurch, until you're at the top. And you are again now facing forward as you are meant to be. And you look out and you see beautiful Orlando in all of its glory. In the distance, you see a traffic jam on I-4. If you look down, you see a parking lot, and you think, maybe my car is down there. And you look around and you see the park and you realize, wow, it's really not that impressive from up here. But there's something about being at the top of a roller coaster that just feels special. The people are tiny, you're on top of the world. And then when you're admiring all of Orlando and its beauty and not so beauty, you're no longer on top and you're racing towards the bottom at a speed that should not be humanly possible. And your heart's racing and it's thrilling and you're having a great time. You've been waiting for this, and then you're thinking it's awesome, and then you're also thinking, I shouldn't be doing this. I can't do this. I'm going to hurt when I get off, and you will hurt when you get off. And then you start climbing again, and down and up and down. And it's this hills and valleys. And I want you to imagine that you're on this roller coaster, the abomination known as Rip Ride Rocket. And at the bottom, you've done the top and you're on the descent. And as soon as you hit the bottom, somebody hits the brakes and you lurch forward and you hurt and you realize, oh no, we're stuck. I'm gonna have to get off of this thing. It's gonna be this whole big ordeal. And that's the emotion I want you to have, because I want to look at Exodus. I want to look at Exodus 15, and I want to look at the emotions that is going through the people of Israel, because they feel as if they were just on top of the world, and then they're going down into this valley, and instead of getting ready for another incline, it feels as if it stopped them right in their tracks, and they're stuck. I'm going to back up to chapter 14. In verse 28 says, the water came back and covered the chariots and the horsemen and the entire army of Pharaoh, and they had gone into them in the sea, and not one of them survived. They were marching, running from the Egyptians, and God parted the sea for them. Something so beautiful, so miraculous. And then as soon as Israel was safe on the other side, the sea started to collapse and returned to being a sea again on their enemy. Verse 29, but the Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground, with waters like a wall to them on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in him and in his servant Moses. And then we get into 15, and Moses sings this beautiful song in verse 11. It says, Lord, who is like you among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in your holiness, revered with praises, performing in wonders? We continue in 15, and it's not just Moses who's rejoicing. Miriam and the women of the camp are singing and performing songs. Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. He has thrown the horse and its rider into the sea. They are at the spiritual high. Nothing could go wrong. And then we get to this place called the wilderness of Shur in chapter 15, verse 22. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea. And they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness, and they found no water. Now, we study the Israelites a lot. We know this journey and journeys like this. And we know that, to put it nicely, at times, they can be a little bit of babies. But also, you have to put yourself in their shoes. I get cranky if I miss a meal. If I did not have water for 3 days, and I am journeying, exercising, another thing I do not like to do, I am not going to be in the best of moods either, but they're only 3 days removed from one of the most astonishing miracles one could ever imagine. And immediately, something is wrong. Now, the application to this, I think, is obvious. There are moments when we are at our spiritual highs, where everything feels right, where everything makes sense, where we can trust in God because we know that He cares and He listens and He takes care of His people, and we know that we are that people. There are times where we feel that deep into our core, and it comes easily. And then there are times, the times that follow that, the valleys after the hill, where we are wandering and it feels as if we are desperate for something to drink, but we cannot find it, and it's just out of reach. In Psalm 63, it reads, "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water." This is a psalm of David. And one of the beautiful things about the Psalms of David is most of the time they are written from the valleys, not the mountaintops. Most of the time when David is writing like this, he is at the bottom. And David wrote this while he was in the wilderness of Judah. We likely assume that he is fleeing from either Saul or Absalom at this time. And he talks about how his physical thirst matches his spiritual desperation, that he's in this dry season where all he wants is God. And yet it feels as if God is just out of reach. And that's where the Israelites are. And that's where we can be sometimes. And those occurrences are natural. We are going to be in valleys. But the thing is, the way in which we react to the valleys is what determines what happens next. And as I mentioned earlier, the Israelites historically, a little bit of babies. Let's continue, verses 23 and 24. But, warning, they're not happy. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What now shall we drink?" And I will admit, I used to think maybe there is nothing possibly harder than going 3 days without water. That's wrong. Turns out there is something much worse. Going 3 days without water, finding water, and then realizing you can't even drink it. So they're suffering. In fact, this name, Marah, means bitter. Right? We see this in Ruth, where Naomi says, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Marah, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me." Right? Naomi returns from Moab empty-handed, full of grief, and she renames herself. She gives herself this new name, meaning bitterness. And I know that's supposed to be the low part of her story, that things move on from there, but I relate to that. There are moments in my life where bitterness consumes me so much that it threatens to be who I am, where I might as well start walking around and saying, "You don't need to call me rich anymore, just call me that bitter one," because that's how I feel. I feel as if there is no hope for anything better, that I'm going to be bitter and miserable for the rest of the foreseeable future, maybe the rest of my life. Just let that be my identity, because that's all I can feel. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15, it says, "See it to that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled." This is a warning, a passage about discipline and endurance. Bitterness isn't just emotional, but it's spiritual corrosion. It's what starts eating away at our faith. And we know that the Israelites are at a valley. And I know it's easy to look back and say, well, if I was in their shoes, if I had just seen what God had done, what God is capable of, and it's only 3 days past, I wouldn't give up so easily. But the truth of the matter is, I have all of this. I have this entire collection of miracles and things that God has done and things God has promised to do. And yet I get into points in my life where I look around and all of a sudden I forget all the things that God's capable of. I forget all the miracles he's done. I forget how faithful he is. And all I see is that I am surrounded by nothing but wilderness and life seems miserable. And that's where the Israelites are. They look around and they see nothing. It doesn't matter that God just freed them from the captivity in Egypt. It doesn't matter that God just parted a sea for them to cross and allowed it to collapse on their enemies behind them. It doesn't matter all the things that God had done, because they looked around at their future and they didn't see it. In Job chapter 10, verse 1, Job says, I loathe my life. I will give free utterance to my complaint. I will speak of the bitterness of my soul. Job here is pretty much declaring that he is refusing to keep his mouth shut. He is refusing to bottle up his suffering. And he is going to take his raw and honest complaint to God. And I think in Job, we learn a couple things about that raw and honest emotion. That raw and honest emotion in it of itself is not sin. But the way in which we use it, the way in which we let it affect us, the way in which we verbalize it can be. Because Job let it all out. And God rebuked him for it. And yet at the end of Job's story, Job was still counted as faithful, that he did not give up. So God here, again, we're back in Exodus, has freed his people, has brought them on this journey where he has done miraculous things already. And they go 3 days without water, and they are acting as if it's the end of the world. And God doesn't rebuke them. He gives them instruction and healing. Let's continue verse 25. And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all of his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. I find it interesting the way in which God provides them water here. Because God, again, chose a physical way in which to purify the water. He didn't have to do that. He is God, creator. He's the one who created that bitter water in the first place. Could have just made it not bitter. The next time they drink from it, it could have just been sweet, clean, pure water. And yet, God gives him an act, a symbol in which Moses can prove his obedience, a symbol in which God can see if Moses is ready to trust. And I find that interesting, because there are times in which I don't understand the ways in which God works. There are things I read about in his word that I don't understand the whys and the whens, and I probably won't as long as I'm alive. There are times in which I look around the world around me, and I don't understand why things happen the way they do. But it's as much as that can pain me, as much as that bitterness can build up inside of me, as much as I can look around and see these things that I don't understand and want to be compelled to the point in which I change my name to my identity to this bitter feeling. God gives us this opportunity to trust in the things we don't understand, to trust in the things that frankly just don't make sense. The fact that God showed Moses a log and asked Moses to throw it into the water, and then miraculously, because that log that God had pointed at had fallen into the water is now drinking, that doesn't make sense. And I can imagine Moses going and saying, all right, guys, this is what God told me to do. He told me to take this log over here, put it in the water, and then it's fine. And I can imagine people probably had some concerns about Moses' sanity. They were probably thinking, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's going to do anything. And yet, because Moses trusted in God, it worked out for the better. It reminds me of Naaman. In 2 Kings chapter 5, we have the story of Naaman. I'm going to read the instructions that Elisha sends with his messenger. It says, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over me in the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Can I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in rage. But his servants came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word that the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Naaman asked some pretty good questions, because Naaman was looking for curing, and the prophet of God says, you have to do this thing, which does not make sense. And Naaman rightfully points out, that does not make sense. And if the story ended there, that would have been the end of it. Naaman would have been right. That doesn't make sense. And he wouldn't be saved. He wouldn't be healed. So we can be bitter. We can be distrustful. We can say, I don't understand. And all of those things can be valid and true. But if that is where we allow the story to end, if we allow the fact that we don't understand why there is suffering in the world, why we don't understand the rules in which God has set out, why we don't understand the ways that things happen, if we allow that to dictate if we are obedient or not, then we can be like as if Naaman paused right there in his story. A leper, unsaved, unclean. And that's it. Or we can be like Moses. We can be like Naaman's servant and trust in the things in which we don't understand. Trust that although it doesn't make sense to us, it makes sense to the God who created it, to the God who commands it. And then we can take part in that gift. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." I think that's what I would call a foundational proverb. Because one, because we teach it and we quote it a lot, but two, because on that you can build a foundation of faith. Trust in God, not yourself. Because when we choose to trust in ourselves over God, we allow pride to take over. We allow pride to take over. We allow bitterness to take over. And we allow bitterness to dictate our actions. We're not obedient. When we're not obedient, we don't get the promises of God. And we don't see what happens in Exodus chapter 15, verse 27. Then they came to Elim, where there are 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. It seems as if Elim was just out of reach, that they were having this moment 3 days into their journey where they could not fathom a better future, where they could not fathom an opportunity where they would ever drink again. And they were just out of reach of this oasis, filled with springs of water and beautiful palms. It's right there. But first, they had to pass through Marah, the moment of bitterness, where their faith in God would either allow them to sit there, mope, and then die of dehydration, or to have clean drinking water and the promise of Elim right around the corner. And I love the story of Exodus in particular, but I love the story of the Israelite people and their emotions, because I find it easy to sit here in my life and criticize them and say, but you're there, you're living it, you're living this. How could you ever not have faith? And yet when I think critically, when I'm honest with myself, I can understand how they lack in faith. Because when life is hard, when you look around and you see bitterness and suffering and pain and things in which you can't comprehend and make sense of, it's easy to feel lost, to feel destitute, like there is no better future waiting. And when you put yourself in their shoes and when you relate to the problems that they are having, and you see that, yes, their problems are real, that their concerns, their questions, their doubts are valid, And when they choose to put their faith in God, they're rewarded. You realize that's the life we live, right? The life that we see the Israelites live, this cycle, this roller coaster of ups and downs, these hills and valleys, is the life we live today still. Hills and valleys. Good times where faith comes easily, and hard times where it's a test, where we have to persevere even when we don't understand. And we've always known this. In Isaiah 40, verse 31, it says, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, shall mount up like wings of eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." And then in Galatians, in the New Testament, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap. We do not give up." God leads us through the Red Sea. He leads us into wilderness, to opportunities for bitterness to take us over. And when we pass through that, he leads us to peace, to Elam, an opportunity to restore and refresh our faith. So tonight I ask the simple plea, really. It's a plea that when you are in those moments of bitterness, and I know you are in those moments of bitterness because you live in the same world I do, and I go through those moments of bitterness. When you look around and you see things you don't understand, and you see pain and you see suffering, and you don't understand that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, to keep moving, keep walking, keep persevering, keep putting your faith in God even when you don't understand. Keep being obedient even when it doesn't make sense. Because at the end of it all, there is an oasis better than any earthly one, better than palm trees and springs of water. There is a life after this where we have the opportunity to be reconnected with our God, with our Creator. An opportunity where things will be restored to how they were meant to be. That's thought, to give you just a thought that I've been thinking a lot about lately. It's the idea that the world we live in is not the world that we're meant to live in. And I know we know that. But if you look back to the Garden of Eden, and I know when you look back to the Garden of Eden, there's really only a chapter and a half of the good old days, the time in which humanity lived in the world they were supposed to live in. But you look at it and you see Creator and creation walking side by side, living in this space that feels not quite like the earth we know and not quite like heaven that's promised, but a place where Creator and creation coexist and know each other. And I think when we look around and we see so much suffering, it's because we're no longer there. But that's, if we persevere, it's where we're going. So I ask the simple questions tonight. If you're not yet a Christian, why not? Why would you not want the promise of this oasis, this place where Creator and creation can go coexist like it was always meant to be? Why are you waiting? But if you are a Christian like myself and you feel as if you live in moments of bitterness, ask you find ways to persevere. I know there are ways that have helped me, and I hope these would help you as well. That finding your church family in these times of bitterness, reaching out to the people who you know who have been there before, that they know it gets hard and it gets better, that prayer and meditation of Scripture, that there is nothing happening to us that hasn't happened to somebody faithful to God in the past. And this idea of just connecting with God, because although we don't live yet in that realm where we are reunited with God, we still have this gift that is unique to us, the ability to talk to God, the ability to bring our problems, our concerns, our praises to the one being who can change the world around us. So if any of that resonated with you and you need to make a change tonight, if you need to come forward or if you need to go home and pray,